We think it's happening. I don't know. So I am Speed of Sound, and we have Call Me Emo. That's the name of your channel now? You changed it?
Yeah, I changed it from it was emotionally stunted emoticon, but it was so lengthy. I said, you know what, just shorten it to Call Me Emo. I wanted to
Yeah,
call
but,
it Mikey Sambo, but apparently you can't write Sambo on YouTube. It's a racist
oh my
term.
God.
I guess it was. Yeah, but it's my actual name, so I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, that's rough.
Your name is a racial slur. That's pretty good. Okay.
Oh man.
Let's see. And Erica got sick Gibbon.
Yeah, back here in the pixels, I guess. Ready to chat. I'm I feel like we're gonna cover some juicy stuff today. I'm excited.
I think so. Let's see. What else was I going to say? There was something else. I forgot. Oh, no, nothing. Anyway, what I got in the mail was is pretty cool, and I don't know if you guys can see things, but this is Todd Charles Wood, the Barrowmans.
Oh wow. You got Todd's straight from Todd's blog, huh?
Yeah, and I'm really disappointed because he starts talking about some program that he never identifies, and then he just goes into this big, lengthy one chapter after another discussion about various plants and animals, and for some reason he doesn't seem to have covered chimpanzees. He covered the only primate he covered were these bush babies.
Really? That's the extent?
I think so. I couldn't find any others. Of course, I haven't had the patience because he doesn't really index things. He does have contents, but they're all. I couldn't find pan troglodyte anywhere.
No, never guess either.
I wonder why he didn't do chimpanzees, because I think if you run the same analysis on chimpanzees and humans together, I think he would have found that we're pretty similar. What do you think?
I think quite a bit of that is fairly intentional. I mean, you look at AIG, they've come out recently with their actual Barrowmans. Like they've finally gotten up the stones to classify the Barrowmans in particular. And they've got, in what I consider to be quite sassy, they've gone back to the usage of Pongo for like all of the hominoids. And they're lumping in gorillas, orangutans, chimps, and bonobos into that. And then keeping humans as their own Barrowmen. And their reasoning is, I mean, really and truly, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like anyone can see that these are different things. Ken's got the eyeball it and call it a day method.
Well, in Wood's book here, now he starts talking about cats, and leopardy, I think, was one of them, and he admits that some of the cats don't quite fit in, but they almost fit in. So, and then he starts talking about holobaromans and monobaromans, and I went and looked the definition up, and they sound like this almost the same thing to me.
Right.
Holobaroman is all of them. Everything that's related, and a monobaroman is like most of them, but not necessarily all of them, or something. And I don't know what the hell they're talking about, but he's got a lot of interesting statistics in here, and he's got these. I don't know if I guess I can turn my cam back on. I don't want to see myself too much, but he's got these really interesting things. You see?
Yeah, that's the graph. That's it.
Yeah, and I think he's having trouble with some of these little outlier squares are like part of the cats.
Right.
They don't quite fit in. But the book is pretty much unreadable. It's just him saying, "Oh, this fits in, that doesn't fit in. That is a high probability. That doesn't."
It's unreadable. Oh my God.
It's completely unreadable.
The blog is pretty good.
Well, it's like a series of single papers in chapters, no introduction hardly, no explanation, no. What I was really hoping for is that they tell me how I think what they came up with is a list of phenotypes. And have you heard anything about how they're doing it? It looks like a list of phenotypes, and I don't know how they compared them to each other, how they weighted them. But he was talking about craniodental. Do you know
Yeah,
any
so
more?
it's something similar to taxonomy, where they would use the character states to build. Taxonomists usually build a tree out of it, but they don't go that far as to build a tree. They just use the character states and they put it in the whatever program he has to measure morphological continuity between one type of organism to the next. And where there is high continuity, as you would see with the squares clustering, that would be considered one kind or a baramin. And then where there's a gap, that would denote where one kind stops and
Yeah.
another one begins on the other end. Yeah, but usually what we have is the gaps between kinds is smaller than the variation within. So you have that, the variation within a kind is greater than the differences between kinds in that
Right.
sense.
Right.
So there's no reason why two kinds can be the same thing. It's funny.
I
But I mean,
wonder,
go ahead.
oh no, I was going to say, I wonder too if they don't use like craniodental features specifically because that's pretty much all you've got when you're comparing mammals. And so they're like, let's just cut our losses and use it for all of them.
Yeah, and he says it's unfortunate that's all he has. So I believe they do use craniodental. But I would be hard pressed to, like when I look at a fish skull, I can see the transition to a mammal skull.
Yeah.
How do you draw lines in these things? I mean,
Yeah.
they're
I don't think they do. I don't think they do draw lines. I mean, the weird thing about Todd Wood is that he's kind of chill with transitional species. He just thinks that they were mostly on the ark, and that transitional forms are like some kind of, progenitor, barraman. Because I know he's okay with, it's either Indohyus or Pachycetus that he is kind of in support of for whale evolution, but I'm not sure.
really. Well, then he mentions in the last chapter, he does talk about the ark a little bit, and he talks about those species that were on the ark and those species that were not on the ark that survived. So apparently he believes that some things like insects and stuff got washed around and survived.
Yeah, I know there's an idea. There are a couple of really weird ideas bumping around about the whole thing with insects because they've got that whole deal where like it has to have the breath of life, and they think because to make it on the ark, I guess, and they think because insects and many arthropods that are terrestrial breathe through spiracles and things of that nature, like book lungs and stuff, that they don't really count and wouldn't have thus been brought on the ark. So there had to have been some other way for them to survive. I've heard floating vegetation mats. I've heard like clinging to bits and pieces of debris, like human settlement debris, all sorts of crazy stuff. But then the weird thing is they also appeal to those big floating forests for insect survival sometimes. And then they also suggest that those big floating forests being bombarded by lightning strikes midway through the flood storm is what's responsible for our carboniferous like peat and oil deposits.
And they don't believe the big floating forest theory of how monkeys got to the New World or whatever.
I think it's worse than that. I think they're okay with it, but they think one single pair got really, really, really lucky. I mean, whereas, conventionally the idea, right, is that it's like you've got this entire population of, I think it would be oligopithecids that are hanging out in the Fayum. And for whatever reason, a ton of them are just getting washed out on these vegetation mats, and most of them did not make it.
Right. And the only other, I paid $30 for the damn book, I think. And the only other useful thing in it is he mentioned something about the post-flood catastrophic environment or post-flood catastrophes, basically. So he was the only creationist I've ever admitted that when the flood ended, it wasn't all just sunshine and blooming oranges and or orange trees and
right.
I mean, all of a sudden there was this like one generational bottleneck, as Standing for Truth puts, and then and man just dominated it, exploded, and all the animals exploded onto the earth because there were like fruits all of a sudden popping out everywhere. I don't understand, but anyway, he mentions post-catastrophic catastrophes, that it went on. Obviously, the earth was not going to be okay for a very long time after cracking open.
Yeah, so there's like, oh God, there's so many weird things too about the whole vegetation problem. because it's like olive trees. I think some very cheeky botanists, I believe, way back when, this would have been a couple decades ago, did an experiment where they were like, all right, well, how long can an olive tree, survive being submerged? And they were like, okay, how long can an olive seed survive being submerged entirely? And the answer is not very long. I think the max was like 3 months.
Yeah.
So you're really dealing with some rough conditions. And as far as, I don't know anything about how robust olive trees are in comparison to other trees, but I feel confident in saying they were not the most robust, nor were they the least robust, suggesting that we have a ton of plant species that just were decimated by the flood and they just happened to fit into evolutionary time. Like Archaeopteryx just couldn't manage the tree.
I have a hell of a time growing a plant in my basically 3-season porch out here with tons of windows and all the fertilizer and water that the little suckers could ever want, and they still die on me.
Oh, yeah, that just about checks out. Yeah, I've got a garden out back that I've been trying to get working, but you know how it goes.
Yep. So let's see. I wonder if Emo, you wanted to say something?
Oh, there was something I was thinking about when it comes to kind. Before we go off, topic, is that a kind doesn't necessarily have to be biologically related in that sense. Let me explain. Let's imagine God creates, let's say, a palm tree kind, for example, palm trees, and He creates like 1,000 palm trees in the beginning. Each individual palm tree would not necessarily have to be biologically related. They may have the potential to interbreed, but then they don't have to be related in that sense. So that was something I was thinking about, because when Todd Wood was talking about in the beginning the kinds, they started with 2 humans, but the other kinds, he may have started off with populations. So he could have created a population of cats, a population of dogs, and that population would be unrelated to each other, biologically speaking, but they may have the potential to do whatever, So then it brings up another problem, because now if kinds could be unrelated and be the same kind at the same time, it becomes even more difficult to classify kinds in that sense. If you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think they really screwed up with that whole Noah's Ark thing, because they started out with potentially 10,000 or 100,000 elephants, right? And then they put them on the ark, and they ended up making their own bottleneck. So I mean, if they could go back and rewrite the Bible to get rid of that flood thing, it would have made their lives a lot easier. Because
yeah, because I mean, the weird thing is that it's like Standing and company will very frequently put Noah's Ark as the reason why humans have low genetic diversity compared to some other animals. But then they're like, you can point to other animals and you can be like, okay, well, cheetahs have really low diversity too. And then some of them will be like, oh, that's a post-flood hunting thing. In fact, as I'm sure you know, Standing proposes that the difference in genetic diversity, or heterozygosity, is what separates humans from the other apes. Of course, it doesn't, because, non-African humans actually have a genetic diversity like on par with bonobos. So why do some animals have this giant bottleneck and some don't? Right. Of course, the answer being because we've been undergoing different pressures for the past several million years, but that's kind of beside the point. That's not what they propose. So there's lack of standardization as per usual that I'm getting growing weary of.
And the African.
Yeah. So sorry.
You can go ahead, Emo.
Oh yeah. So basically, what he's proposing, and it contradicts himself in the own book contradicts itself. So basically, what he's saying is that because God created 2 human beings, we should expect low genetic diversity. For some reason, 2 human beings somehow limits the amount of diversity God can create within them. Fine. But if we expect low genetic diversity from 2 individuals, we must also expect low genetic diversity within the kinds, since only 2 was on the ark. But you don't see that. You see a wide diversity of, the collective diversity within the kinds is very large as compared to a single human. So his own model contradicts what he's saying all the time. It's strange that no one actually picks it up in the debates when they talk with him. But if he's predicting that we should expect low genetic diversity from two individuals, then we should also expect low genetic diversity from two animals of the ark. He doesn't think about it, but
yeah, there's no reason to suggest that wouldn't be the case, right? I mean, like, if they didn't have that pesky flood, then they could be like, oh yeah, two humans, hundreds of animals, per kind, whatever. That's just how he chose to do it. But this big wooden boat, it creates a lot of problems for the genetic diversity, particularly given that the post-flood time frame is much longer than the pre-flood time frame, meaning you can't explain it away with like, it hasn't been long enough that they've experienced this like as marked of a low genetic diversity in their entire population.
May I suggest that the four of us get together here right now and pray to God to get rid of that damn boat? Because it's causing issues.
If it weren't for that rascally boat.
The interesting thing is that what Standing does, he very quickly says that it was a one-generational bottleneck and that we had a multi-generational extended bottleneck. Now, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Do you know what he's talking about?
Mean?
I don't know what that means. Does that mean that all of a sudden, like, there were 8 people and then there were like 100,000 people over in one generation?
I mean, unless Eve started, not Eve, unless
Adam,
those women were like laying eggs quicker than lizards lay
eggs. They might have been.
Yeah. So the weird thing is too, is that it's like, and I know I've said this before, but it's like AIG and ICR, which, Standing and company selectively pick and choose from depending on the issue, because we know they're not CPT. Like, we know they like hydroplate, which is very, very weird as a choice, in my opinion, particularly given all of the other creationist organization geologists are like, no, that's a bad idea. Yeah. But they're totally cool with it for whatever reason. But AIG's best date is they revised the Egyptian chronology using this guy David Roll's chronology, who coincidentally did so to account for the Exodus. And then they're like, this is going to give us, because we're going to use this incredible doubling rate, and this is going to give us enough people that we need for the Exodus at the time that the Exodus occurs, and for people to make the pyramids of Giza, completely forgetting that you also have to have enough people to build all of the other monuments occurring simultaneously all over the surface of the planet, both in Mesoamerica and over in China. But the weird part is they'll invoke this hyper fast doubling rate to get the population up high enough to explain all of these monuments. And then that rate just stops, because if you take that like rate that they use all the way to its termination, like to now, our population should be like orders of magnitude higher, but it's not. So
and they employ the same thing for speciation rate.
Yeah, it's like, so what happened?
Yeah, and if it was explosive right after the ark, why was it not explosive prior to the ark?
Yeah. Yep. And the thing is that giving it a weird name like they've done with created heterozygosity does not make the case better. In fact, I think it makes it worse.
Created heterozygolousness.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah, it doesn't bode well. And also heterozygosity just seems to be another word for diversity. Like, I don't.
I'm trying to get.
I don't think he understands what heterozygosity actually means.
It doesn't seem he does.
Yeah, I have no idea.
He seems to think it
means simply that you have two different alleles
at the same loci
for a specific genotype. Nothing more, nothing less.
Yeah,
the same locus has up to 4 different alleles, and if you look at like insulin, why in the hell would you need more than one gene or one kind of insulin? And then if you look at a population today, you're going to find even 100 different variations for that one locus. So I don't understand how heterozygosity gets them out of that.
Yeah, I think the whole idea is they're just imposing a lot more on it. like based off of the very unfortunate trip that I took rather through Replacing Darwin, it seems to me that it's just another. It's like an extreme version of diversity, right? And they're using created heterozygosity to suggest that the alleles are, like, as Standing likes to say, front loaded with all the necessary diversity for all of the descendants. And of course, Nathaniel Jeanson has given it a cool name in order to make it sound more scientific, because if you're like, created genetic diversity, that sounds kind of silly. In my opinion.
Did you read that whole book?
Yeah, I took a trip through it a couple years ago. It wasn't that great.
Oh my God, have you gotten counseling?
Oh God, I mean, most of my counseling was actually like right after that was when I started talking, like getting online and kind of complaining and bitching about this kind of thing. So I guess it did have a spurring and it did have some side effects.
I've spotted through it in my ADD way, just picking up as much as I could. And they're just, I mean, there's only so much boring that I can tolerate.
Oh my God. And the weird thing is it's this bizarre interlacing of like legitimate scientific concepts just being explained so that he can like sound like he knows what he's talking about. And then they're interspersed so finely with random left field woo concepts that are not supported by anything other than what he claims to be his own work.
They pop out of nowhere.
Yeah, the papers of which we still haven't seen.
The like when I first got the book, I remember sitting down in the kitchen reading it, and I started reading it. I thought, well, this is pretty good. He's doing a real good overview of genetics. And then I thought, my God, he's making a really good case for nested nesting, and it was like a really good case for evolution. And I turned the page, and he had a picture of like an amphibious assault vehicle and an SUV and a minivan. And I'm like, what? And then he starts,
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, what happened?
Yeah, where did that come from? Yeah.
Where did it come from?
And that's like one of Stanley Fitch's favorite argument when you try to explain the nested hierarchy. He would go to vehicles and show how they have a nested hierarchy. But the thing is, the nested hierarchy with evolution is not the same you would find with the cars. We don't just predict a nested hierarchy, but it has to be one that is concordant with a bifurcating evolutionary process, and it has to be concordant with chronology, where you don't find things too much before other things. And we can predict not only what we would find with transitional fossils, but we can predict what we would never find in nature because it would violate the phylogeny. So, for example, you could predict you would never find an amphibian with breasts, or an arthropod with a mammalian-style inner ear system, or a crustacean with a tetrapod jaw system, or whatever. We can predict those kind of things. The only time you would see those things is when a designer designed it in like Pokemon. You would see things like Bulbasaur, an animal with a flooring part, or you would see things like what's his name, Apom, a monkey with a hand on the tail.
Yeah.
You can do that because the designer is not limited by phylogeny,
Yeah, I think Pokemon is an excellent example, actually, of exactly that. It's like Pokemon, as awesome as it is exactly what we wouldn't see. I think also the fact that the thing that I like to use is that there's just so much redundancy. Like if you want to take it to the genetic level, it's that's not what you would expect from a design, right? You would expect even if we're just saying as identifiable baramins, you would expect novelty per baramin to a degree, but we don't really see that. It's all a gradient.
I have a friend.
The other interesting thing
sir.
Standing brings up is the whole rust on a genome thing. And for the longest time, and I still don't fully understand, what in the hell are you talking about, Standing?
Guanine tetraoxide.
Yeah.
Basically.
The genetic entropy thing is a completely it's separate. Weirdly enough, it's like a unique issue that the creationists are also really. It's between that. It's human chromosome 2. It's mitochondrial Eve. It's ENCODE. It's a bunch of different things that are all in and of themselves kind of separate issues. And by misinterpreting all of them, it's like summoning Captain Planet. That's how you get the creationist interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I'm aware of like the implications his own arguments has to his own worldview. At times.
Genetic entropy presupposes the perfect genome. This fantastical imagination or imaginary idea they have of the perfect genomes in the very beginning. So I've got some clips that we can look at where they talk about, at least I think I marked them, where they talk about men being able to carry 800-pound breastplates and run for miles and live for 1,000 years because they had this perfect genome back then and we've been falling apart. So the whole genetic entropy thing presupposes that perfect gene, the perfect combination. And yet they have never shown us what that perfect combination is, ever.
Well, not even. Yeah, even the idea of suggesting that, like, because standing, like, the whole rust on a car thing is like these near neutral deleterious mutations, right? But something like that, the way that fitness and natural selection works is if it's bad, it's selected against, and if it's good, it's selected for. And those are always, of course, to different degrees. But there is nothing that is slightly bad that's just untouched. To my knowledge, that doesn't work. I mean, error catastrophe has been attempted. Like, they tried to demonstrate error catastrophe with swine flu. It did not work, contrary to what you hear.
Well, there's a lot of neutrals that are in what I call the encode yard. They're basically near neutral mutations because they do not matter.
Your mic is causing him to
He got it.
Yeah.
What's that, Emo?
Yeah, he got it.
Emo echoes a little bit for some reason, some of this hardware. But these near neutral mutations are the fund from which evolution is it's how evolution is funded. And these are the things that ENCODE found. They found all these hits where basically there's translation into mRNAs, and there's like the cell is a puddle of mud. And there are millions of compounds that get created in the cell that quickly get eaten and degraded because they don't do anything. They don't have any function. And eukaryotes have this wonderful ATP mechanism, the mitochondria, and we have enough energy that we can make that work. And that's why eukaryotes took off with this diversity. At least this is all my theory.
Yeah,
basically,
one of the reasons.
Energy to fund it.
So one of the reasons that things get degraded almost as quickly as they're created is that anybody who's studied like how complicated biochemistry is will tell you, and I will tell you, things have multiple ways of interacting. Like if you leave something in a cell for too long, it might travel somewhere it's not supposed to and just begin fucking up all sorts of stuff.
And get eaten.
Yeah, and that's why things get degraded.
Apart. And there are tons of proteins and mRNAs there are a lot of mRNAs that don't make it out of the nucleus. They have a very, very tiny effect on the whole thing. There are some that make it out, get partially translated into proteins, hit one of those pausing things and die. And that happens all the time. Right. It's just that eukaryotes have the power to do that because of the mitochondria. We have this amazing energy production system. Who is David Neff? He's in chat. Do you know David Neff? Anyone?
David Neff. I don't know a David Neff.
I'm not sure if I've talked to him in the past. I know he just subscribed. Anyway, hi, David.
Maybe I do know David Neff. I don't know. David Neff, do we know one another?
I don't know him.
No, he's a friend of Emo.
Oh yeah, he had a debate with Standing and Kent a couple of days ago, and we did a kind of. I played a little devil's advocate for him with Kent as Kent. Sorry.
Cool. So I did watch that. Awesome. Let's see. So you want to try running some of this video and see what we think here, or we have so many things.
Yeah, I'm always
good?
down for something like that. I'm always game.
Well, let's see if you can hear it. I think I'm at the right point about Darwin. I don't know, but we'll see.
I can't hear it.
Really?
Yeah, it's quiet for me as well.
You can't hear it at all?
No, not yet.
I
Well,
can hear
it's-
like gentle little chirps from the microphone or from the video, but
So where's it coming out? Let me see here. Hang on a second. Display port. It should be there. Well, let me try again. I wonder if I know what I got to do. I've got to stop the share. Sorry, guys, but I suck.
it's okay.
Don't worry about it. I hate technology. It pisses me off as well.
No. Let's see. Okay. And please click. It won't click. Oh, there it is. Share screen. Chrome. I'm going to go to a Chrome tab. Oh, I didn't go to the Chrome tab. So React app. I think I got the right React app. We'll try this out and we'll see if this is the one. If it says hello world, there we go. Let's see if you can hear it now.
Nope.
It's still dead still for me.
Yeah, okay, I know why. Because these guys do not default to share the audio. So I always forget to do that. This is going to work this time, guys. I swear.
3 times worth the charm.
I am so polished. Share audio. You got to click that button. Okay, we're going to try again.
We'll get it. We'll get it working.
Can you hear?
Try it again.
I mean, an atheist.
I got it.
Yep.
You know, Charles Darwin studied at seminary school. He became a minister and then dropped out of that.
I don't think he actually became a minister. I
He
think
got
was
married and
studying
he had a couple
there.
of kids.
Right.
And one of his daughters, whom he is said to have thought of as his favorite daughter, got a stomach illness. It may have been cancer, but she suffered with a lot of pain for about a year, and it killed her. And shortly after that, he wrote on the origin of the species and became an
He's
evolutionist.
missing something out there.
Put forth his idea of common
Okay, but just listen for a second here, and then we'll get past this.
ancestry between all the types of living things. I find that to be kind of remarkable. I think there's a relationship there. I think he became very angry at God.
There we go. The old atheists are just angry at God theory, and that's why Darwin wrote the origin.
The interesting thing about that, though, is that contemporaries of Darwin were also starting to notice the same thing that Darwin was, like before he published Origin of Species. And what he's saying about before Charles Darwin chose to publish the Origin of Species, before his daughter died, the book was more or less complete, but he was reluctant to publish. He was reluctant to publish due to the family's health, but also due to the fact that he was a little bit concerned about the scientific
Backlash.
about the backlash and the response from the community about it.
Religious backlash, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he waited for what, 25 years or something?
Yeah, something like that. It was quite a while.
Yeah, so there's this really cool website that chronicles all of Darwin's letters. And in around 1879, I think, this guy John Fortis wrote asking if Darwin still believed in God, and whether or not theism and evolution could be compatible. And Darwin said, quote, "A man may be an ardent theist and an evolutionist," unquote. He cited Kingsley and Asa Gray as an example, and he said, quote, "In my most extreme fluctuations, I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of God. I think that generally, and more so as I grow older, but not always, that an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind." And then later on, he confessed that he was 40 when he gave up Christianity, which I do believe is not the year that his daughter died, or the year that Origin of Species was released.
Right.
So I mean, Darwin had his own thoughts on things, and was revolutionary in the field of biology, of course, and his theological viewpoint had nothing to do with that. Like, straight up, they just weren't related.
Yeah, and it's this keeps coming up, and there's a number of people in chat that will constantly say, "You're just mad at God. You're just mad at God." Bill Morgan just recently said something about me being mad at God, and I said, and I wrote this little post about, yes, my mother was kidnapped by insane clowns, and I had to grow up in a carnival, and I slept in a snow cone. My mom was enslaved for 18 hours a day, injecting color into snow cones, and I had to sleep in a snow cone cup. And I was born as a result of a sexual misunderstanding with the clowns. And and I hate God. Why is God so mean? And then I found Father Darwin, and I've been happily an atheist ever after. So,
yeah, that explains the insane clown posse too. That's a leftover. Yeah. That's a vestige.
It is. That's my life story. That's my life story, and I'm sticking to it. So I'm mad at God. Unfortunately, I was never a believer. Maybe when I was 6 to 8 years old, I tried really hard for my mother, because she took me to this Presbyterian church, and they brought me to Sunday school, where they told us really bad stories about basically the origin of Black people, which I don't even think I should talk about online, because it was that bad. And at some point, I think when I was 8 years old, I was driving home from Mountain Iron, Minnesota with my mother, and I remember telling her, "Mom, I don't think I believe in this stuff." So I've never really been mad at God, because there never was a God in my life. I don't know. My poor mother, all of her life, she's like, "Mikey, are you still an atheist?" Like, yep, I am, Mom.
You're like, "Mom, I will let you know if something changes."
This is kind of sad, but as she was dying, the day before she died, I told her that I'd converted, and I told her I believed and that she was going to heaven. And yeah,
good stuff.
But I figured I owed her that much. Anyway, let's see. So there's a whole bunch of clips here, and I'm not sure. I basically marked them, and we'll go through. He just goes on to talk about Darwin and how Darwin was bitter and all that stuff. So
yeah,
anyway,
shocking. That's shocking coming from Neffy. Neff really goes for some of the outdated stuff. I mean, he's like one of the only guys that's still, proposing the Palexi prints are like a thing.
He has his own entry in the Rational Wiki, and he was Immutable told me yesterday. You want to tell the story about the Bukkake, the moon Bukkake?
Oh God, I know about this. Yeah. That's been going around about Neff for a while.
It's one of Nephilim's more insane ideas about how the fountains of the deep opened and the flood was initiated. So he has this idea to the extent of there's like this mile deep, like fountain, like ocean of water beneath the earth. And like right before the flood, somehow or another, enough force was exerted on the plates to cause this water to skyrocket, burst through the crust. And not just that, no. It doesn't stop there. It was ejected at such a high velocity. It went into the atmosphere, exited it, found its way to the moon, and caused all the craters we see on the moon.
Yeah, that's hydroplate for you. I mean,
but it's worse than that. Kent Hovind has adopted it, and so has Standing for Truth. And on his channel, I think maybe it wasn't Standing, but somebody on his channel was saying that's how the Earth cooled. The heat problem with the continents flying around at 40 miles an hour, and the radioactive decay. Their solution to that is that all this water that jetted out into space took the heat with them. Standing for Truth said that.
No, I know. I'm actually. It's funny that you bring that up. I'm as we speak, like right before this, I'm working on a very, very, very long video, discussing the heat problem and all of the proposed explanations for it. I've been emailing a physicist back and forth as well, just trying to make sure that all my calculations are right for all of that, yeah, that's an insurmountable problem. It does not matter how you hash it, and at least the guys with the catastrophic plate tectonics over at AIG have the guts to say, no, we've got to invoke a miracle here.
Right.
And here's the fun thing about that. The amount of pressure and heat that would be released from that kind of event to cause water to move at that kind of velocity, ignoring the fact that water moving at that velocity would be vaporized instantly. The vaporization heat released from that kind of event would cause basically all life on Earth to go extinct.
Oh, that is putting it very kindly. It's something like, I think I've heard a couple of different ones, but it's like if you combine the accelerated heat decay, right, or accelerated radiometric decay heat, you combine that with the friction from the continents flying around, and you combine that with the heat to release all of that water into escape velocity, as well as the heat from when it all comes back down, not just the water, but the ejecta, you get 14 hydrogen bombs per cubic kilometer of ocean. Or if you want to talk about the crust, you're vaporizing it about 28 times.
Well, Standing for Truth solved that problem. He pointed out that we use water to cool nuclear reactors, and there must have been a mile of water between all that heat and the arc. So basically, it was insulated. Because
yeah.
It's going to go to steam pretty quickly, Standing. I'm sorry, but
and actually, nuclear reactors are not insulated by water. They are cooled by water because water is a great conductor.
Yeah, water's going to be, let's pretend that we're dealing with 1/100th of the heat that would actually be a problem. Maybe your mile of water is going to help a little bit, but it sure isn't going to help you from the radiation from all of the accelerated decay. But we'll believe me, this is not necessarily my field, and I've been having to learn a lot of physics over the past couple days.
Yeah, and I'm trying to avoid physics because I'm old and I only have one life to give, and I'm giving it to genetics. So
yeah, true.
Here's the remarkable thing, even with all that, because the initial claim was that, well, it used to be at least, that Nephilim believed that that kind of water carried whales from the Earth to the moon, and that kind of thing caused craters or something like that. But the fun thing about that is if you calculate how much of that water would have actually hit the moon, the cross-section you obtain only says that only a few centimeters of water would have hit the moon. It would have been nowhere near close to
Yeah, because it's so far away. The globe is, the sphere is so gigantic. But anyway. Yeah. Okay, I don't know what Nephbird is, but I'm going to go to Supernatural because this is where, maybe Nephbird is worth listening to. I don't know.
Okay, so phylogenetics, that's evolution in a nutshell. Basically, today, evolutionists claim the genetic similarities found in various types of creatures is powerful evidence for evolution. This is
okay. So instead of letting him babble on about this, basically there's a paper, The Evolution of the Hawk's D11 Expression in Birdwing, talks about a frame shift in the Hawk's genes, and there's some controversy over which digit is which in the bird.
Yeah, I've heard this one as well. Yeah, I like this one.
Anyway, the paper now, let's see what Neff says here.
Basically, this is their go-to argument today. It's the one they use the most, they love the most. But look, there's major problems with it.
Major.
For example, this study right here shows that they state, however, the wing digits of early birds like Archaeopteryx are morphologically similar to digits 1, 2, and 3 of Cordelians, presenting
crocodilians, not Cordelians,
2, 3, and 4 phalanges, respectively. We arrive at the same conclusion. I'll let you read this for yourself. But the problem with this is that the genetic information that produces the digits in the claws of birds doesn't line up with the genetic information that produces the fingers in mammals. And it really ought to. if evolution were true. Because remember, evolution has to preserve things and modify it to make something else. Like the genes that produce the wings of birds are allegedly the genes that produce the legs in a frog or a lizard, but modified over time with mutations, so that instead of producing legs, now they produce wings. You see what I mean? The front appendages, instead of making legs, now they become wings because of mutations, right? That would require the same set of genes being modified over and over and over by mutation. But we've discovered that the genes that develop the wings in birds is not the same set of genes, not in the same location of the genome as the genes in reptiles like frogs and lizards.
Okay, that's enough of that. Anyway, he's claiming that there's an entirely different set of genes. No, there isn't. They're invoked at different times and in different parts of the tissue. They are the same genes. I read the paper. The paper doesn't say anything like he's implying at all. Anyway.
Well,
Shocker.
but here's the one thing about that. I challenge anybody listening who supports Nephilim. Find me an instance once where Nephilim has read anything beyond the abstract of a paper.
Well, what he does is he makes these clips and he puts them in his presentation, and he never actually looks at the paper at all because, of course, he can't read the paper. And this is not a study; it's a hypothesis, basically, that they're going through.
Is that he won't even bother sourcing the claim either.
Well, he gives you. He does give you
the source of the claim. He won't even give it to you.
You have to type it into Google and find it yourself, and I did, because I do that all the time. Anyway,
someone's got to do the double checking. That's the thing. I mean, if we've learned anything from all of this, I guess I'll just speak for myself. If I've learned anything from all this, for every creationist source that is, adequately representing the paper they're citing, there's like 6 or 7 that have nothing to do with the point, that are thrown in there for effect.
Right. So there's that. Somebody's got to read these papers. There aren't enough of us. I wish we had an army. Anyway, so
all the other ones are too busy doing real science.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I'm not doing any real science. I do have a microscope behind me, and I was going to get a lab coat so I look like Kent Hovind.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I want to begin all my videos with me looking under the microscope. What do you think of that? But
might be hard to do like emotes and stuff, hand gestures.
I don't have a lab coat, but I do have a bee suit. I could put that on.
I think that'll work. That'll be all the buzz, around YouTube, right?
Right. Instead of a stethoscope, I could hang a thermometer from my neck. So
there we go.
Yeah, there you go.
And I call myself Dr. Speed of Sound.
Of course.
Of course. Gotta sound somewhat classy.
Okay, so then Praise That I Am and John Maddox come in here, and Neff goes to feed the dogs or something. I think that's what this is.
Well, the atheist idea is
not.
that nothing supernatural can exist
More Neff.
at all.
Sorry.
Nothing. So there can't be anything. And because information is created supernaturally, they have to deny what information actually is. See, they have to deny that it is a non-physical fundamental entity.
I think that was all I really wanted out of that, is that he and Maddox does this too. They just pull it out of their butts that information has to be supernatural.
With Maddox, at least he's kind of blatant about it, because he's provided his sources, and you can see that none of the articles really agree with what he's actually saying.
Right. And then I think this is where Praise comes in, where I marked SOS.
SOS on Praise. I've had nothing but good experiences with Praise.
It means just one substance, which means mind. It's fundamental.
I found him to be hard to talk to, but then he complained about that when I said that, because we were talking before the show, and I was like trying to get him to chat, and I guess he was busy or whatever. But he strikes me as a little bit on the spectrum. I'm sorry.
God.
He's very civil when it comes to certain matters, but just his biblical switch turns on with other matters.
Yeah, the Right. That's a good way of putting it.
He seems quite knowledgeable about the Bible. I mean, he really gets into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I could buy that.
Yeah, but he doesn't know much else. So let's see, where's it at here? We could play it.
Everything is fundamentally a construct of mind. And I think that's demonstrable in quantum mechanics. I mean, that's demonstratable in the cell.
Oh, geez.
Math,
Please
even math.
don't talk about quantum mechanics.
Yep.
Oh,
It gets much worse.
God.
I think he proposes a something here that's kind of
type
interesting.
of mental construct as well. So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. In one of my debates, I brought up the whole premise of
He's talking about me.
Mathematics and logic, right? Not being material. They can have application in the material world, but the principles themselves are not material.
Absolutely, that's a language for math, but I would say that logic is a little bit different. I would say it's a reflection of the mind of God. Like it's prescriptive. It tells us how to think. We can access those abstract objects.
Right. And the person I was debating was a quote strict materialist, and they adamantly argued that logic was material. And I'm like, I don't know how to. I was actually, I mean, to be honest, for a moment, I was rather at a loss for words because I'm like, I don't know how to respond to something that, and like I said, and part of the reason I'm bringing this up to you is you're much more.
He was at loss for words. Apparently, he kept trying to get me to say that things were immaterial, like logic and math and stuff like that. And as a strict naturalist, I don't talk that way. Sorry, John. But anyway, Praise comes up with something kind of cool here, I think.
In depth in the philosophical world. I can't really think of too many philosophical mindsets and concepts that would ever go down the rabbit hole of logic not being immaterial.
Well, you just met one.
On that, or am I missing
absolutely, but you could easily refute this. What they're saying is logic is descriptive. But here's how you can respond to that. You can say, well, yeah, sure, it's descriptive of something prescriptive. But here's another thing, too. So if logic is observed, does that mean that blind people are not logical? Ask them that question.
Okay, do you hear that?
Okay, how does that even make sense?
I know.
The first part of that conceptually doesn't even fit together. How do you describe something prescriptive without descriptive language? It's not as if the two things are completely divorced from each other. If there's something prescriptive or if there's something that you need to describe, there has to be a set of tools by which you can describe that thing.
And how did he leap to the part where basically if you observe it, you have to see it, and if you're blind, you can't observe it? Like
that's simply not true. I mean, I know several blind people who they can tell a wall is in front of them because they have a cane and they can feel, they can hear because of the sound or because of, how far away they are from it, that it's a wall.
Yeah. There's this overwhelming idea that if you can't lay your eyeballs on it, then it cannot be confirmed in any shape, form, or fashion, which is the definition of bad science as far as anything observation based. That's just not a reliable means to even really collect data in general, I guess. I mean, eyewitness accounts are kind of the worst kind.
But,
looking at something isn't the way.
If that were actually true, though, 99% of chemistry wouldn't actually work.
Because you can't see.
It's all what's the word I'm looking for? Instruments.
Yeah, instrumentation, spectroscopy, certain things that allow us to detect or to figure out the chemical structure of something.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not seeing the molecule, we're seeing, electronic signatures that come about via fairly complicated processes, which I won't describe.
But if an unknown author 50 or 100 years later says that some women saw the guy rise up out of the tomb, then it's okay, except blind people wouldn't be able to observe that. But right?
Except nobody actually saw, even in the biblical account, nobody saw Jesus rise from the dead. What they noticed was that the tomb was empty.
Tomb was empty. They didn't see it happen. They didn't see it with their own eyes. They weren't there.
How can it count if you don't lay your eyeballs on? I don't know. I think that this falls into the classic, like, it's a double standard, you know? I mean, I don't know. I really wish there would be some method of, like, all right, this is going to be our criteria for evidence, and this is what we're going to use, and it's all we're going to use.
Right. Well, evidence is pretty subjective with them. Pretty amazing. I'm not sure where they go from here, but
I don't know.
Yeah, just pretty
Listening to
ridiculous.
Maddox talk about philosophy is going to get me like really pissed.
Yeah.
I've seen him try to talk about philosophy, like in some of his own videos, where he's trying to point out why he thinks intelligent design is needed for like the creation of life or something like that. And he ends up mixing up like 3 different philosophical arguments together without even noticing it.
Yeah.
Like he mixes the prime mover argument with the argument from design with something else. I forget what it is, but
And in that debate with him, as a strict naturalist, I interpret everything basically as physical. And I don't go to the place where you start talking about abstract objects or you start talking about consciousness or spirit mind. I've schooled myself in staying away from that kind of language. And he kept trying to put that language in my mouth, and I wouldn't accept it, because logic flows from the thing that's not understood about human beings is that we start out not a blank slate, but we start out with a pretty empty mind. And the very first science experiment we do is we poke ourselves in the eye. That was my first science experiment, poking myself in the eye. And from there, you figure out what works, what's logical, how objects, when an object is behind another object, you cannot see it. And from there, the rules of logic can be derived from basically the physical universe and how it works. And that's why it is not immaterial. And if you want to call it immaterial, you've left the reasonable realm where you can have a discourse about what is real. So that's my position. And I am not, I argue with my logic professor from Normandale College all the time about this, but I am not your typical spirit mind abstract stuff guy. So not a lot of philosophers would agree with me, but I would just say things like logic and stuff like that it's immaterial in the sense that there is no direct physical substrate for it to be related to directly. Well, after it gets in our mind, but then our mind is, philosophy of the mind, man, we can go for about 6 hours on that one. So we better not.
Yeah. Philosophy is kind of in the same realm of physics, right? Like I feel like I just don't know enough about it to really speak with any kind of authority.
Well, if that's the case, you're doing philosophy.
Good.
One way to know about if you're doing philosophy correctly is if you're as confused as the people around you.
Oh, perfect. Excellent.
Right.
Then I guess I can just call myself. Remind me to put that on my resume.
Yep. I've had go-arounds on rational skepticism about, if you're doing metaphysics, and I explain why I'm not, and they say, well, if you explain it that way, then you're doing metaphysics.
And you're like, please. No.
I mean, you can't get away from it. It's like this, it's like something stuck to your finger, that you pulled out of your nose. You can't get rid of it. That's philosophy.
Metaphysics will be quite annoying in that way if you're not careful with it.
Yeah, I made quick work of metaphysics. I have a blog on that, but nobody ever read it. Anyway, let's see what else he says here, and then we'll go on to the next step.
Well, the atheist's idea is
what?
that nothing...
Wait a minute. Okay, I'm sorry.
I would say that even dualism...
Is he talking about, okay, are we going on?
Is probably not as robust as monism, which monism means just one substance, which means mind. It's fundamental. Everything is fundamentally a construct of mind. And I think that's demonstrable in quantum mechanics. I mean, that's
yeah, we're going back. So he's an idealist, basically.
The other issue with that, though, is if you really take that position seriously, you're a solipsist, and that produces some pretty wild fucking issues.
Right. Idealism automatically bleeds into solipsism, or that substance idealism. And they don't like when you talk about that. But
well, to give a kind of a little teaser of what that implies is it implies that the mental faculties you use to arrive at something aren't anything abstract at all, but they're actually constructs of the mind, which is verifying constructs of the mind.
Yeah.
And there is no sense of reasonability within that kind of context.
The idealist has to admit to himself that his children are also constructs of his mind. They don't really exist. So it's okay if you kill them. And that reminds me of genetic entropy. For everybody that accepts genetic entropy as the BrainTrust at Standing for Truth does, they have to admit that their children are more mutant than they are, and somehow less than they are, less perfect than they are. And your grandchildren will be even less perfect than that.
That could be the old drunk uncle figure.
Yeah, you would think too that given how long the genetic entropy has like allegedly been a thing, and that 4,400 years ago, adult human males were picking up 800 pounds like in each arm. That there would be some means by which to measure this, like we would be able to see it through time in human fossilized specimens or just preserved burials. And because bone density plays this wicked role in how much you can pick up, right, in general strength. So genetic entropy is problematic in pretty much any angle that you can look at it from.
Yep. And then, oh God, I'm going to have to clip some videos, but Ramat and one of SFT's videos was talking about how superior chimpanzees were.
Oh,
and then
yeah, that's.
But then at the end of the video, he was talking about how mutated they are and how they couldn't survive. So he went from talking about how superior they were within 1 hour to talking about how there's only 6,000 of them left in the wild, and they only live until they're 16 years old. Which
You
I
mean
didn't.
Matt can't figure out his own argument?
He contradicted himself in the same video. I'll put it together sometime. We'll do a little chop on it.
Yeah, I'd love to get my hands on that. That would be a fun chat for sure.
Yeah, I have to pull all these. I have to pull all these times.
Oh yeah, something I wanted to say on the genetic entropy is that the genetic entropy, as they would describe, is no different from devolution as Behe would describe, and devolution is no different from evolution in general, because they would say, for example, that snakes are somehow degenerate lizards, and with that same logic, we'd have to assume that manatees are somehow degenerate mammals, and then whales are degenerate mammals because they've lost structures apparently. So humans are degenerate apes, and then I guess tetrapods would be degenerate fish because they lost their gills and their structures. Birds would be degenerate dinosaurs. As long as you lose something along the way, you have degenerate. So even if you were a single cell and you had the abilities to live in a specific niche, and you become multicellular and you lose the ability to live in the old environment, you have now devolved into a multicellular organism. So once you lose something along the way, it's devolution or genetic entropy in that sense. If you try to question scientific truth on that, as to how do we distinguish genetic entropy from evolution, he won't be able to tell you the difference, because every transition in evolution you would lose something, and they would consider that to be devolution.
Right. Yeah. I think I've heard something similar to that as well.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm not even sure necessarily it's requiring the loss of something, although sometimes it will happen. Sometimes it's just a change in how things are expressed. Like I believe the majority of separation between humans and other primates is because of how is due to the expression of genes, not the difference in content between genomes of us and other primates.
In another video here, I have the thing about where they're going on about the giant beaver and how the giant beaver was so much more superior because it was bigger. And lately they've been leaking into their after show hangouts, which are really cool. They're talking about bigger is better all the time, that it's more evolved if it's bigger. So things
Really?
have
No,
evolved.
I know for a fact I've had that exact conversation with Raw Matt. Like I had in my I'm fairly certain it was in my chat with him. If it wasn't him, it was standing. But I was like, all right, there isn't an ultimate fitness. Like ultimate fitness is not really a thing that's applicable, because fitness changes depending on the environment.
Right.
Well,
So
and for that matter, I mean, can you define fitness without the context of environment?
No, you can't. Yeah, because what pressures are being applied? What defines how fit the organism is? It's not in a vacuum.
Linsky's bacteria.
Mm.
So anyway, let's see. So should we go on and hear about Tiktaalik?
Oh, God. Time to hear creationists explain away Tiktaalik, even though it was a prediction.
This is kind of long, but it in this section they kind of reveal how they think about evolution, I think, and it's kind of interesting. So we could try this. We'll see if it works. I believe.
Oftentimes, for example, Tiktaalik, the so-called fishapod, right? The big transition from water to land. But then I can't remember how many years later, maybe 20 years later, they found tetrapod fossilized footprints in layers
20 million years older.
Tiktaalik.
Do you want to comment on that?
Colon tracks. Yeah, I remember this one. I ran into a guy on the debate evolution subreddit who was like super, super, super into the idea that this just like roasted evolution entirely, because they had no idea that speciation and divergence time they're two separate things.
Right.
So you can have a species that exists after its speciation, right? I mean.
Well, and the other thing too is that even if that were true, right? Within the same geologic period, I mean, that's the blink of an eye. It isn't exactly unexpected that you could find other transitional forms of organisms that would be able to somewhat walk on land.
You could still find fish that are just beginning to paddle up on land.
Right. So, I mean, the fact that you're finding other species that are earlier, or evidence that there might have been other fish that were starting to become more tetrapodal. So what?
This just attests to their inability to sit down with a pencil and draw a tree and look at it. It makes some sense of it.
Yeah.
But anyway.
The whole idea, right, that you've got this perfect line that traverses all the way through the tetrapods and up through, the reptile mammal transition, and then of course the primates and humans is. I mean, it's like March of Progress, like 1980s shit. I don't know why they can't seem to grasp the idea that it's like there wasn't a single organism that grew, legs, that developed legs and became terrestrial, and then every other terrestrial animal came from it. It's much more likely that there were multiple organisms that were coastal in nature, and multiple organisms seized new niches as arthropods moved onto land. So I think the point that Immutable made is exactly it. I mean, who is to say Tiktaalik might be our direct ancestor? The organism that made those footprints might be our direct ancestor. It doesn't really matter. They're very similar in their sort of evolutionary journeys.
You have no evidence that Tiktaalik had kids.
Yeah, true.
We have evidence of fossilized whales giving birth, evidently.
Yep.
Yeah.
That doesn't count because that's flood. That happened during the flood.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, I think this gets good, but we might have to let it run for a while to kind of get the gist of it. We'll see.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I only study like geology and paleontology peripherally, but most times, like when you're looking at a transitional specimen, when you're looking at a fossil that's supposed to be transitional between one species or another, no taxonomist or no person who's studying this will tell you, oh yeah, this is the direct ancestor between, apes and, or
right.
Gorillas and humans, for instance.
Ooh, I will say some anthropologists do that sometimes, but they're usually just very zealous.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say, like, most times what's actually being represented is they end up saying something to the extent of, like, the characteristics that this organism has is representative of the population like that would have had this transitional type of characteristic.
Yeah, it's the way that I've explained it before is that it's like when we look at transitional species, we don't mark the species, we mark the gradient and the ratio of traits. Like, a transitional species is just a middleman between two arbitrarily decided organisms, And it's like, okay, well, if it's transitional, then it has close to a perfect ratio of the two traits. That would be the idea.
It's like with population genetics. When you first get into it, it's really difficult to get into the idea that it is populations. It's not particular individuals mutating, like the Kent-Hovind idea. I mean, it's entire populations, and populations behave very differently than an individual. When you first start studying genetics, you find yourself thinking in terms of individuals or pulling a Kent-Hovind in your mind until you get used to the idea of populations, which are very different. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Emo, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I was saying that they would argue about stasis, but not understand what stasis is, because stasis is the reason why you would find more basal forms appearing so-called after the derived one. So you would see Tiktaalik, because it's a more basal form, but may have went through a kind of stasis, so it remained relatively stable. And I tried to use, like, for example, wolves and dogs to kind of explain it, to say, well, look, dogs evolved from wolves. Yet we have wolves that pretty much look like wolves from 10,000 years ago. And we can kind of use the modern day wolf as as the ancestor, but it's not the actual ancestor. We can kind of use it as to show what it would look like.
Yeah.
And that is what transitional forms are. It is the kind of representative of the ancestor, but not the actual ancestor. But they don't understand it. The only time stasis is understandable is to show that, hey, this dragonfly looks like this dragonfly today, and that kind of thing.
To jump in a little bit, I think the actual either the species that represents the original like wolf thing that whose ancestors kind of became dogs actually went extinct. Like there's no longer any there are no members of that species still alive, but there are still dogs alive, if I recall right.
Well, it depends. I mean, there are organisms, right? I mean, where the common ancestor is like the only way that I think you would know one way or another is by looking into the future, right? Because I mean, by definition, if we look at recent species, the ones that have survived are just the ones that are here now.
Right.
Yep.
I think they knew it in this case because I think they determined it genetically that species went extinct, but it's actually kind of interesting that it used to be at least the case that especially when you're studying like birds and their different kind, like how various they are, especially in dinosaurs. There's some dinosaurs where you really can't tell the difference between, or can't characterize it clearly as, as a reptile or a bird.
Yep. Okay, should we move on a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the water to land supposed transition, I thought about this quite a bit. Just every time I hear that. Okay, if the premise of evolution requires the environmental factors,
oh fuck, John is thinking again.
We're gonna get some sad
to cause the mutation modifications. If the organism is in the freaking water, why is it ever going to how is it ever going to have a environmental causation for the requirements for moving to land?
But isn't it epigenetics anyway? Like, whenever the environment does something, isn't that where that shows foresight, where the creator put that on?
Did you want to pause? Anybody? Yeah. If anybody wants to pause, just say pause real loudly.
So, Mattis, the ocean, as big of a place as it is, it can get crowded after a while, and the resources might start to get scarce. Do you not think it's possible that some organisms might want to move on land to acquire new niches or to have a broader source of availability for, their diets and their nutritional environments?
Well, let's put it this way. At this time period in the early middle Devonian, the oceans were crawling with placoderms, like the very first super predators that would pretty much eat anything. Now, it would be kind of weird if we found Tiktaalik or Eusthenopteron or, whatever, some of these more transitional tetrapods hanging out in the middle of the sea, but that's not where we find them. We find lobe-finned fish in sort of the semi-coastal waters, and then we find organisms that are lobe-finned fish, but a little bit more derived in directly coastal waters, stuff that would have been, particularly brackish and things of this nature. And the weird thing about brackish water is that it can be pretty low in oxygen, so it's probably going to be in your best interest if you can acquire oxygen by more than one means. So there's your pressure for air breathing. Well, now that area is getting a bit more crowded, kind of like what Immutable was just saying. Maybe you head a little bit more in towards the coast because there are these weird, cockroachy looking things that you're just about to catch and then they scurry right out of the water. And you're like, well, what if I just follow them up there a little bit? Well, that's going to be your selection for first pushing up out of the water and eventually being able to wriggle your way after your meal. Or it could have been that it was annual droughts and that being able to move from tide pool to tide pool was the pressure. I mean, you could come up with 100 different reasons for what would spur this movement. We're not at a loss for them. The question is, can we, the fun part of it is looking at the paleo environments and saying, okay, which one was it probably?
Yeah. And there's like I think I talked to you before, Erica, about Minnesota. Our lakes are slowly closing in over periods of hundreds and thousands of years. And there is some pressure. We have things called bullheads and bowfins that can breathe out of water for a great deal of time right now. And as those lakes close in, those things are going to be selected for. They manage to go from one lake to another. They manage to crawl across, a bit of land and get back in the water. But I mean, it's pretty, Jesus, environments change. I mean, what is so hard to understand about that?
Yeah, that's the part that's difficult to grasp. And I mean, you really can't blame them because it's like, from their perspective, right, the environment changing, there's just not enough time. We don't see environments change nearly as fast as they require them to in that teeny tiny time frame.
And you think about also where they're coming from as well. I mean, right after the worldwide flood, I mean, the world is a fucking mess.
Yeah.
It's, and part of it though, it kind of goes against the entire premise like that John was trying to use here. That kind of environment would actually favor evolution more than it would disfavor it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have species that, if they're still alive at all, are going to want to escape because now the fundamental environment by which they've been living in for, thousands of years has changed, and it's no longer easy for them to survive in that kind of environment. So something's got to give.
I'm not sure if we'll catch this part, but Neff does say that the fish saw a bug out of water and it jumped up and it grew limbs suddenly and ate the bug or something. I don't know. We'll see if he comes.
Oh,
is he goofing or is that like a classic Neff joke or?
He's making fun of that's what evolutionists think happened.
Good God. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Already instilled in nature.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's what we're discovering now in terms of what they used to say were just pure mutations. It's epigenetic modifications are allowing for that. I'm talking about from their perspective. Where are the environmental causation factors for XYZ in the ocean
That's a
to
great point.
have the environmental causation to now be able to function on land?
That's an excellent
I've never
point.
heard an
Where,
actual
where,
argument.
where are the environmental pressures to do that? So the evolutionist has the dry pond theory, which was put forth many decades ago, like 60 something. Actually, the idea was put forth in the 19th century. Charles Darwin put the idea forth, and it was championed for many. It's been always championed. So the idea is that the local environment was losing its water, like a lake, a giant lake, or a bay, and the animal felt environmental pressures because of a loss of a lack of food in the water, because the species that it depended on were dying off. right? So it needed other alternate food sources. So it because it happened to, now listen carefully, because it happened to flop around on the shore and snatch a bug, this provided the environmental pressures for it to continue to flop around on the shores and snatch bugs off the shore instead of getting food in the water, right? So this somehow provided the means for the organism to develop. Now in legs instead of fins. Now in Charles Darwin had crazy ideas. He believed that something called gemmules existed throughout the body, and they collected in.
Anyway, isn't that precious?
By the way, what Darwin would call a gemule is what we would now call a nucleus of a cell, or just a cell in general.
Oh, really? Oh, Emo dropped out, and I haven't let him back in. What happened?
The other thing I wanted to mention is that, Maddox, why do you think epigenetics and genetic mutations are mutually, like, they can't exist in synergism with each other? Because I don't understand that. If you have genes that can be created, but you also have epigenetic factors which encourage the expression of some gene over some other gene in that particular environment, what's separating the two from synergistically operating?
Yeah, it's that, and this idea that it's like there's this overwhelming feeling that they propose that people who abide by conventional science are just scrambling for ideas here. That it's like, oh no, how are we going to get our tetrapod? How are we going to get our fish onto land? How is this going to happen? And Neffy's like, well,
we're so desperate.
They've been at a loss for quite some time now. And then it's like, you can't read a tetrapod paper and read another tetrapod paper and necessarily have them being, working under the same, mechanistic pressure. So it's like, I don't know where, we have a glut of hypotheses. That's the problem is narrowing it down.
Right. Yeah. And if we don't get it right the first time, then science is invalid.
Yes. Science is not allowed to change. You have to remember that.
Brief announcement. If I suddenly drop out and the stream goes dead, we have a tornado warning about 5 miles from here. And the thunder gods, the Hindu thunder gods, are about to throw lightning bolts at me. So
they're getting pretty angry, are they?
Well, they're pissed off because we're talking about, we're picking on the BrainTrust.
I know. Hey, I can stay for about 8 more minutes and then I got to hop off. I'm about to have a
okay, we'll see. You're about to have
a light dinner.
Oh, dinner. Okay. I thought you were gonna do a debate. I was getting excited.
Oh God, no. Good Lord. Yeah. No, I don't have that in me right now. I'm trying to teach myself light nuclear physics, and it's just not going very well because I've never been great at physics.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see if we can get through part of this, and then maybe we'll hang it up for the night and redo it at another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you can see, I have a whole lot of marks here. Oh, and by the way, phosphate beds, Colton did show up. And we went through. Yeah. We did a thing on phosphate beds, and I think we buried them forever.
Oh, thank God. Good stuff.
Because I read from their only source material, which is one book. I'm about to get another book in the next week or two that I think refers to Holmes' book, but he misspoke when he said hadrosaur, and that is the only reference to finding a dinosaur with humans. So anyway, that one's dead. But,
yep, thank God. Good riddance.
We'll go through a little bit more, and so when are you out? About 5 minutes?
Yeah, 5-ish. Yeah, 5:10.
Okay, let's play a little and see what happens. I don't know where they go from there.
And the organism's gametes, and then we're passed on to the idea of inherited traits. This idea has been disproved by modern science. Inherited traits are not passed on in a general sense. For example, if somebody has a deformity, a physical deformity, it's not usually passed on in the offspring because it's an anomaly. So, but back to the dry pond theory. So it's losing food in the water, so it needs to get it on land. So Charles Darwin, in his ignorance in the 19th century, in the absence of scientific understanding, thought that was the pressure that caused creatures to develop legs instead of fins, right? That organisms had a natural ability to do so prior to the understanding of genetics. Remember, DNA wasn't even known.
I don't know if you guys want to listen to Neff, or should we try
Okay,
to?
there was so much wrong in that statement.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't even know where to begin on that, actually.
Yeah.
the majority of traits in some aspect are passed on through Mendelian genetics. The strength of those characteristics can be determined by epigenetics, definitely. Although, yes, usually a deformity won't get passed on. Although, what determines if it's a deformity, really, and still is true in human culture, is influencing how much, or rather, how much can the organism live its life? Can it reproduce? So if you have a fish that has, some kind of extrusion near one of its fins that's starting to become more, that's starting to resemble something like a leg, if that's not interfering with the function of the fish in any significant way, there's no reason for it to be selected against.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So-
not to mention the fact that I'm fairly certain Darwin was not like a Lamarckian guy.
Right.
No,
That's already really just ringing bells in my noggin.
Well, you can just see how they think. Like when John starts talking about this causal pressure, basically, that they're almost thinking very naively, like a second grader or third grader would think about that this one organism had some pressure, got hungry, popped out on the shore, ate a bug, and grew some limbs. I mean, it's just that sort of thinking. They're not, because deep time is such a foreign concept to them.
well, and unfortunately, I've seen other people who try to argue this kind of neo-Lamarckian version of evolution, and it just, to me at least, it doesn't seem like it works. Right. Because the initial idea of Lamarckianism, at least to my familiarity, is the example given with a giraffe. That, why do giraffes have longer necks? Well, because giraffes are trying to get fruits, and so they kind of will themselves to try and stretch their necks out longer, and that desire is passed on from parent to offspring, and that's what causes necks to have longer. Giraffes have longer necks, essentially.
There's some interesting stuff that I've read about recently about behavior and epigenetics preceding some mutations. So that basically there be an epigenetic modification, or there will be some behavior where the animals or the population will get itself into an environment where the only way it can survive is to select for certain mutations. So basically epigenetics, so it's almost Lamarckian, but over a period of just a few generations, where epigenetics will force the mutation's hand by killing most of the population. And it's like with cockroaches, when we had like just a few cockroaches out of hundreds of thousands that developed this mutation to handle pyrothins, and then they were forced basically to only the only thing that was going to survive is what had that mutation. But there's some interesting new stuff on that that I just uncovered the other day. But anyway, I'm not sure where they go here. There's a wonderful thing here. John Maddox talks about body plans, and then they talk about the giant penis, and I can't remember exactly what that was.
Oh my God, that's horrifying.
Moshima and Meshima is Nephilim trying to pronounce mesenchymal, which is always fun. And then they get an epigenetics. So there's a whole bunch more here that we could get into, but it is getting a little late, and it has gone totally black here inside of 5 minutes. So
Oh, man. Be safe.
yeah, well, I'm in the basement. My son is on the 3rd floor.
Yeah,
wow.
we can get down to the basement.
Well, he's like my canary in the coal mine.
Oh,
Oh,
of
God.
course. Yeah, true.
If I hear him screaming, then I just jump under a table.
That's the duck and cover sound.
Yep, that's why we have kids.
Yep, that's the intrinsic drive to reproduce, huh?
Yeah.
It is, yes. Little canaries. Anyway, Emo, you dropped out for a while, but you're back. Did you have anything?
Yeah, I got my connection went away. But maybe next time we'll start on the body plan thing, because he does argue that you can't change a quote unquote body plan, but he doesn't define what a body plan is
Oh, good.
or what would count as 2 different body plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they would say, for example, that humans and chimps have a different quote unquote body plan without defining what the hell a body plan
For
is.
supposedly spreading lies.
And this is only one video. I have 4 of them up there. I named them all, brilliantly named them all AAA. But there's a whole bunch of other things down here. Down here, they get into linkage. This is SFT stuff primarily. And then Cell comes on and talks about a few things.
Yeah, I saw that Sal seems to have joined the BrainTrust.
A little bit. He's kind of standing on the edge, but he is willing to help them out. Immutable and I had a thing on his channel today where we were talking about organic chemistry. And so we can, Sal and I continue to have a relationship, and we're trying to get James to let us in on modern debate, so him and I can debate on philosophy of science and ID and creation. But James is reluctant. He wants us to have partners.
I see.
Yeah, and I thought, who would Cell partner with? I can't think of who Cell would fit in with.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of who I'd partner with. I'd ask you, Erica, or Mutable, or Emo.
Absolutely. Well, I wonder why he wants partners.
He said that the people are getting tired of the one-on-one creationist argument.
Oh, gotcha.
But Cell and I aren't going to have that conversation. We're going to talk about. I want to talk about a whole lot of stuff deep into ID and creation, and how it affects science and how it affects the medical profession. So it's a philosophical talk. So
it's a shame that we really have to have that conversation, especially given the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial has already.
Oh, yeah, it's time to have it again.
Because it's
evidently
especially with some of the behind the scenes with that kind of stuff, the creationists weren't even trying that hard to get ID passed as a supplementary, or as a theory that should be taught next to the theory of evolution. Because one of the only reasons it was recognized was because in pandas and people, there's an instance where the word creator there's one instance where the word creator isn't changed to intelligent design.
Yeah, it's create intelligent design or whatever.
Yeah, it's something like that. It's an amalgamation that only.
Creationists are almost more honest at intelligent design, because intelligent design will not pick a spot where the intelligent interference happened, and that drives me crazy about them.
Yeah.
Well, with intelligent design, and what I will give Michael Behe credit for is that at least he's firm in his position. Because when people were asking him about, or trying to challenge his own position, granted, it's a disingenuous position, but the reason his position was so robust was because he would not admit to the fact that you could consider a change in function of some pre-existing thing as evolution.
Yeah.
Which is just, especially given his background, I just find that remarkably stupid.
Yeah. I thought that was wild as well.
I'm Michael, there's a lot of things you do that are probably great in the lab, but this is not one of them.
Yep. Yeah. Everyone's got their limits.
Yeah.
Who's the other one? Behe is a biochemist, right?
Behe and Myers.
Yes.
Myers. Okay. Myers recently did an interview, and he as much as said he was sounding creationist like. Like he'd crossed over from ID to creationism.
Yeah. Well, Behe's chill with evolution. He just thinks it's super guided, as far as I'm aware. But Myers is not.
Well, that's what the other guy was talking about, is that everything was, that it was guided constantly, that there was constant intelligent intervention.
Well, maybe Myers has taken that step. I
think so. Myers is he looks like kind of a pointed-headed fool to me.
And he's
listen, he's not even a good philosopher, and he's supposed to be a philosopher. So,
oh Lord,
I don't know.
All right, dude.
Anyway,
I'm
okay, guys.
Bite.
Yep. Goodbye. Goodbye, Erica.
Take care. Nice meeting you. It's been fun.
Goodbye. Goodbye, Erica.
Take care. Nice meeting you.
So anyway, I think we'll hang it up. I could use a rest. But God, I got a whole bunch of stuff here, like bigger, better beavers. Stuff here, like elephants, warrior gene bias. Oh, a girl in my class. God, we should have covered that one. Remember that from yesterday, Immutable?
Oh my God.
With Shadow Dancer.
Please don't remind me. Oh.
Do you want to run through that real quick so we make it public record?
Sure.
Okay, we'll do a girl in my class. Oh my goodness.
Tony, all of you guys will laugh at this. She called herself in the very beginning of the class. Oh shoot, now I'm forgetting the name. No, two. That's the English name. She's not a male. She's not a female. She's a what's the middle one?
Gender non-binary.
No, she doesn't know what different genders.
No, not a transsexual. It's
non-binary, all that.
Non-binary.
LGBT.
She called herself a non-binary. She was clearly a woman. So I call her a woman. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have compelled speech. And she was so offended by me and the rest of the class, of course, because I wouldn't, and I'm like, no, God made male and female. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like biologically you're male and female. And yeah, it was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
So I think there may have been one of the Christians.
Yeah, there's just a whole lot wrong with all that. And prior to that, Shadow Dancer's talking about how she was shunned in her class, and the class was, ganging up on her. And I got a feeling that it's her putting her religious chin forward and insisting.
Not even just that, but because she is confused sex with gender.
Yeah.
So she's confused the idea of like what a person's biological designation is as, male or female. She's conflated that with a person's internal representation of their sexuality.
And she was just being an absolute jerk in class.
Oh, yes,
and
she was.
And trying to make a point of her religious beliefs when the poor person just wanted to be called by what they identify with, and it really doesn't hurt to do that.
No, it doesn't. It honestly seems like that Shadow Heathen in this case was just being an attention whore.
Shadow Heathen?
Shadow Dancer was just being an attention whore.
I like Shadow Heathen better. Anyway. And then, there's a whole bunch of stuff here, but we'll get into it next time. So anyway, anybody have anything you want to say to wrap up, Emo?
No, can't think of anything.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Yeah, nothing in particular. I guess next time, well, you have the topics at hand, so I guess you would go over them. Would it be the same video, or you have others?
I have 4 of them here, or 3 of them I think that are important.
The rest were all atheists.
Maybe the next.
Oh, hang on a second here. I got to mute the sound.
The rest are probably atheists. Okay, Shadow Dancer. Everybody's just out to persecute you, right?
I don't know what happened to that one. This is John's 5 arguments, which are pretty bad. Then we have the Neff video, and then we have the Standing for Truth one. But I mean, at the rate they're pumping them out, I mean, I can sit and pump timestamps into my React program all day long. But I have to do some software development here, so it's easier for me to tag these videos. This turns out to be a pretty good tool for it. So anyway.
We should, if you guys ever get desperate, we should go over one of Maddox's philosophy videos, or one of the videos where he claims to have a logical argument for the existence of God.
Yeah, it's so hard to find sentences there, though. I remember you and I tried to go over it, and we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find a well-formed sentence to even. I got confused about what he was even saying half the time when I started looking at it in detail.
A lot of the
Pretty amazing.
times, what you'll find from John Maddox is just a stream of consciousness
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
and random jump cuts.
Yeah, I think I did 2 videos like that on my channel when I just woke up. I just started talking about stuff, and I need to redo them and take them down because they're just bad. Bigger, better beavers, cow pies, young earth. We had a lot of stuff here. Anyway, so let's do it again, guys,
Sounds like a plan.
at some point. But I'm going to go away tonight. I'm going to end the broadcast now. Okay.
All right.
I don't think it'll end everything, right? No, just end.